Hello, my name is Ann Pelham, and I'm honored to be here today with David Rubenstein, who's a longtime and important leader for Duke University and a strong supporter of all things Duke. Our conversation is taking place as Duke celebrates its centennial. So David, you've had many roles at Duke since your arrival on campus back in 1966 as a freshman. You served as a trustee for 12 years and as chair of the board from 2013 to 2017. And in 2019, you received the University Medal for Distinguished Meritorious Service, Duke's highest honor. You've also been an exceptional donor to Duke, contributing more than $100 million to support facilities and programs for libraries, the arts, financial aid, academics, athletics, and Jewish life at Duke. And your philanthropy extends far beyond Duke. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here and look forward to our conversation.
Well, I'd like to focus a little bit on how you got here, your initial connection with Duke. How did a smart young man from Baltimore decide to attend college down in Durham, North Carolina? You didn't go north, you went south. You didn't go down the street to Johns Hopkins, you came to Duke. So how did you hear about it, and what got you in this direction?
I can't honestly say that I surveyed the scene and said Duke was the perfect university for me. That wouldn't be honest. What actually happened was I went to a large public high school. There were 1,500 people in my class, one guidance counselor, so you got about 10 minutes of his time if you're lucky. So I didn't really get any guidance counseling. I bought some books about colleges, and I got the usual applications that somebody from Baltimore would probably get if you wanted to go to a good school, some Ivy League schools, some schools like Williams and Amherst and Wesley and those kind of schools, University of Chicago, places like that. But the night before I was filling out the applications, or they were due, a neighbor of mine said that his brother had gone to Duke University, but that he decided not to fill out the application to go to Duke. He didn't want to go where his brother had gone. So he said he had an extra application. He said, why don't you fill it out? And so I got it, and I filled it out. I didn't think I'd get in. I didn't think I'd get any schools because my handwriting was very bad, and I didn't have a typewriter. So I had to do it all by my script, which is very bad. I wasn't sure people could read it. So I applied to Duke the night before it was due. And then I heard back that they accepted me and they gave me a scholarship. And I was an equal opportunity scholarship applier. Whoever gave me the biggest scholarship, that's where I was going. So Duke gave me the biggest scholarship, and that's why I came here.
You crossed up, you ran through your description of your high school, but it was a exam driven high school. You had to get in from all over the city. It was an all boys school.
It was an all boys. You're correct. It was an all boys, all city merit school. And I was in one of their special programs, and I had skipped a year of junior high school. They had an unfortunate program at Duke, at Baltimore, where if you did well in the 6th grade, somehow you could skip the 8th grade. I got in it, and I didn't realize then, because that was a stupid thing to do, because I graduated from high school when I was 16, and I entered Duke when I was just barely 17, which is, I think, a year too soon. So if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't have skipped the 8th grade, but you can't make life all over again, so this is what I did.
I'm asking partly because I imagine that gave you some confidence about your intellectual abilities if you had already gotten into that high school.
Well, I did reasonably well in high school, but there were people far smarter than me, and in recent years, I've obsessed over figuring out whatever happened to these very smart people. And as I've gone through the internet and other friends and connections, I found that many of these people petered out. So many people who were superstars in high school turned out not to be so great later on. I wrote a book on leadership not long ago, and in that book I pointed out, in my observation, there were 3 types of periods in your life: the first third, second third, and third third. And many times people in the first third, they're the superstars, the Rhodes Scholars, the Supreme Court clerks, presidents of student governments. But if you go back and look what happened in the second and third third of their life, they tend not to be so great. Many times people just peter out. If you look at people who are president of the United States, for example, in the last 100 years, only one person who became president of the United States, the ultimate job, was somebody who maybe predicted to be president when he was younger, and that was Bill Clinton. He was an all-state leader as a high school student, but most of the other people were nothing in high school and to speak of, or they certainly weren't going to be anybody who thought they would wind up as president of the United States. So I've come up with this theory that the people in the first third burn out People in the second third actually are people who are like the tortoise and the hare. They can come along and slowly get better and better. I've done that maybe to rationalize how I got lucky in life in the second third of life and maybe the third third, and I wasn't such a great person in the first third.
Okay, so it's an interesting theory. I think in your third, you're certainly having a good time.
I'm doing well, but in the third is the problem with the third is you don't know how long it's going to last.
There is that problem.
So when I was young, my parents used to read the obituaries in the papers every day. I said, "What are you reading the obituaries for?" And now I read the obituaries. Now I know why my parents read it, because you want to see who died that you might know. And I always look and say, how come this person younger than me died and I'm still around? So when you get to be in the third, as I am, you don't know whether you're going to make it to your 75, 80, 85, 90. Who really knows who's going to get to 95 or 100 with their faculties?
Well, if I'm correct, you just had a birthday in August.
I had a birthday. I turned 75. However, I'm thinking of going back to the place where I was born, the hospital, see whether they could give me a new birth certificate and maybe say that the years were wrong. Maybe I was born a couple years later than they actually originally thought.
Maybe they don't know you skipped 8th grade and all that stuff.
I don't know. But if I can't get that certificate, it is correct that I did turn 75, an age which, I'm astounded at this age. When I was working in the White House for President Carter, I said to him, "You have no chance of losing to Ronald Reagan. He's 69 years old. Nobody that old can get out of bed in the morning." I looked up President Eisenhower, who looked at me like an old man when he was president, and he left the presidency when he was 70. And then when I started practicing law, the old man who started the firm and was the grand old man of the practice at a firm called Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, this is Judge Rifkin, he came in and doddered in to give a speech to the young people that first day. And I said, "Wow, this guy's so old. I don't know if he can really make it through the end of the day." He was 70. So I'm amazed that at 75 I can still walk and talk and chew gum.
I think you're really busy for a person who's 75.
Well,
Still working at the Carlisle.
yes.
But you're not doing 70 countries a year anymore?
I'm not flying around the world as much as I used to. I do fly a lot, and I used to fly at the peak. I was honestly flying about 800 hours a year, which is probably too much. I'm now about 350 hours a year. But that's because, I have other responsibilities now. I'm not running my firm, Carlisle, day to day, and most of my nonprofit responsibilities are in the United States. So I do speeches and some fundraising and some nonprofit work outside the United States, but it's not as much as it used to be.
But you're traveling all over for some of your television shows to interview people.
My television shows do take me places, and most of those are done in the United States. Some are done outside. But yes, I do a lot of TV interviewing these days, and just like you are, right?
Yeah. So let me remind us where they are. You have 2 on Bloomberg.
Well, I have
2 on. Go ahead. I'll let you talk.
Well, here's what I think it is. Maybe I have it wrong, but I have a show on Bloomberg which is called Peer to Peer, which is I interview prominent people, and they can be almost anybody that I can get to do an interview who's reasonably prominent. Usually I know them. Then I have one called Wealth with David Rubenstein, also on Bloomberg. It's about finance. I have one on PBS on history. It's called History with David Rubenstein. I'm starting a new show on longevity, which is my new famous topic that I care about, and it's about health and how people can live to a longer age. So I'm going to do shows on obesity, drug addiction, Alzheimer's, cancer, and things like that, and talk to the best doctors in the United States about it. And that show will debut probably in the latter part of this year.
Is your audience the baby boomers for whom it's too late, or the other
I hope so.
second,
I don't know.
third people who?
Well, usually people in the age of 20 and 30 don't care about longevity, because when you're 20 or 30, you think you're going to live forever, as I did. When you get to be 75, you think about the world differently. And I've thought about doing a book on a subject which my publisher said nobody will buy. It's about, when do people actually think about death, and what do they start doing about it? So what age do people start thinking they ought to take care of themselves better, they ought to do a will if they haven't had one, or redo their will, or do other things that kind of make them live longer? And when do people actually finally figure out, yes, I do believe in God, and yes, I do want to live in an afterlife or something like that? I'm trying to figure out what age that is, because clearly when you're in your 30s or 40s, you're not worried about your will. But now, one of my friends who are my age are talking to me all the time about their wills and redoing their wills and this kind of stuff. So it's clearly a subject on my mind. But my publisher said, if you put death in the title of a book, it won't sell. So I say, the title is, when do people start thinking about death? It won't sell. So I have to come up with a different title if I'm going to do that book.
Okay, I'm looking forward to finding out what the title is. Uh, you've written a lot of books too, aside from the television shows, and they've sold well. They've been well received by critics.
I've just finished my 5th book, and I'll give you a copy as soon as we're done. It's on the presidency. It was a little difficult because I wanted to interview some living presidents. I interviewed Bush, President Bush. I interviewed as well Bill Clinton, and I interviewed Joe Biden. I interviewed Donald Trump. But because the election was changing so much towards the end of the nominating period and so forth, I had to redo it and write a lot of additional addendums because at the time that I wrote the book, I thought I thought that Biden would be challenging Trump. But that book is out, and it's called The Highest Calling. You may recall that I once used to say the highest calling of mankind was private equity. I now have to admit that presidency is a higher calling. So it's called The Highest Calling. It's about my observations on the presidency, and I interviews about great presidents and also interviews with presidents. And that's my 5th book. The other 4 sold roughly the same amount. They sell roughly about 80 to 100,000 copies, which is not great when you think about it. If you're James Patterson, you probably sell 1 million copies every time you do a book, or Doris Kearns Goodwin or Walter Isaacson. My copies are not quite in their level, but to be on the bestseller list in the New York Times, probably need to sell about 20,000 copies. That's it.
So you've written bestsellers. So,
By that standard, yes.
yeah, and I don't think you need to make $1 million. So it's working out well.
Well, I give away all the proceeds to hospitals and things like that. So I do it because I enjoy doing it, but not because I'm going to make any money on it.
So we'll get back to Duke in a second, but I really feel like you're having a stimulating and interesting third of your life. And I'll just say, with some fun in there, you took the Oriole to your commencement address at the American University's Business School and managed to get him an honorary degree. You recently worked with the Library of Congress to go in the attic and get out some of their treasures, and you helped create a new Rubenstein Treasures Gallery there this summer. It opened this summer, I think. And I mean, that's just 2 of, I could make a list of 20 things that you're doing. You've got fresh ideas, and you've got the ability to execute them, and you have connections with all these boards. I think it feels like fun to me.
Well, I chair a lot of nonprofit boards, and in the nonprofit world, you probably can stay on the boards a little bit longer. So I still chair the Kennedy Center board, though I'm going to give that up at the end of the year after 14 years. But I still chair the National Gallery of Art board, and I chair the Economic Club of Washington board, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the University of Chicago board, and that takes some time. And then I've just on a corporate board, Moderna, which is the company that created the vaccine for COVID-19. I've just had my first meeting on that recently.
Did they give you an orientation or something?
Well, I just had orientation with them this week, and
so they really did, huh?
Yes, I just had orientation this week, and I now realize I need to take another COVID-19 shot.
Yeah, so there's a new one coming.
There's a new what they call a combo shot. It's RSV as well as COVID-19. You get a booster, and it has both in there.
That's what grandparents have to do. So
yes,
you never know what you're going to get.
Well,
grandchildren, is that?
I have 3 grandchildren, and they're young. They have no idea what I actually do, and they probably never will pay much attention to it.
But they're still fun to hang out with sometimes.
Yes, I never thought I'd be a grandfather, but I am.
So let me just go back to the books part of your life. When you were at Duke, you worked in the library, and I think I remember a story of that you told about in Baltimore as you would spend your Saturdays going to the library. So could you talk about libraries in your world?
Libraries are very important to me because I came from a blue-collar family, and I guess early on I realized that if I read books, I could learn about a world that was far different than the world my parents lived in. And so my parents did not graduate from college or high school, and I wanted to do more than they had done, though they were very good as parents. And so when you were 6 years old in Baltimore, you get a library card, which enabled you to take out 12 books a week. So I would take them out on a Saturday, and then I would read the books that whole day, and then I have to wait another week to take another 12 books out. So I realized that I really loved reading, and I just couldn't read enough, and so I still try to read roughly 100 books a year. And the reason I'm able to do that is I can read reasonably quickly, but I interview authors a lot. And by interviewing authors, I force-feed myself to read their books. So we just finished the Library of Congress National Book Festival last week. I've been the co-chair for the last 10 years, and I interview typically 5 authors about their books, and then somebody interviewed me about my new book, and I have to prepare for that. So I love reading, and I think reading books focuses the mind more than reading a magazine or a tweet or something like that. And it's an important part of my life. When I came to Duke, they gave me a 3-part scholarship. It was a grant, a loan, and a job. And the job was working in the library. But it had the advantage of this. In those days at Duke, like many university libraries, it was a closed stack library, which meant students couldn't go into the library looking for the books they want. They had to go to somebody at the front desk. Well, since I had the ability to go through the stacks all the time because I worked there, I could get all the books I needed more readily than the average student. So anytime I needed a book, I could always go find it quickly. So that was an advantage of working in the library.
Yes. So that was your main role, going in and back and forth to the
Because if you wanted a book from the library, you had to go to the front desk and fill out the form, and then I would be one of the runners. They would have to go find the book if it was there. At that time, the Perkins Library hadn't yet been built. It was still the main original library. And then while I was there, Perkins opened, I think, in the latter 2 years of my undergraduate time at Duke.
Because I'm thinking by the time I got there, we were both at Duke in 1970. You were in the spring graduating, and I was in the fall coming for the first time. And I remember going in the stacks and loving the ability to see books near the one you were looking for, which is great serendipity.
Well, when you're what class were you?
74.
Okay, so I think when Perkins opened, they got rid of the closed stacks, and so therefore they let students go in. And
there was more space.
It was different then, but I did this my freshman year, and there was closed stacks, and I love libraries. I like reading.
Is there an experience you had either at the library or on campus that you remember that stands out to you, just looking back? I mean, it's a half a century now, although nobody at Duke was celebrating the 50th anniversary of university.
Well, I remember when I would get assignments from my professors, I could go to the library and go to the back of in the stacks myself and get the books more pretty quickly, so I had an advantage over my classmates, and I could probably get books more readily than them.
Okay, you mean there were not as many? There weren't lots of copies.
They didn't have many copies in those days of books, so sometimes if reading a book was something that was helpful, and I could get to the book quickly because I was working in the library, there was an advantage. Maybe they helped me. I'd get through Duke. I don't know.
You got through Duke, but you also were Phi Beta Kappa, and you were magna cum laude and all that. So you didn't just get through Duke. You did very well.
I did okay, but it's an interesting phenomenon. In those days, Duke University was a good school, but it was honestly a regional school. When I applied to Duke, it was considered one of the best schools in the South, called by many the Harvard of the South. And Stanford in those days was called the Harvard of the West. It wasn't as if they were good enough to be Harvard, but they were the Harvard of the South or Harvard of the West. Obviously, the world's changed. Stanford's a great university, maybe one of the greatest universities in the world now, and Duke has now risen to be in the top 10 universities in the United States by almost any measurement. And you think back on it, in the segregated South, there were a lot of good private schools. Rice, Duke, Emory, Tulane, among others, and Vanderbilt. None of them, other than Duke, is now consistently ranked in the top 10 universities in the United States. Only one school that was previously segregated is in the top 10 in the United States, and only one Southern school is consistently in the top 10, and that's Duke. So Duke did something that transformed itself to make it not only the Harvard of the South, but a school that can compete with students, for students with Harvard. And it's a big change. When I spoke to my 50th anniversary class not long ago, it was a little delayed because of COVID, and I went to our admissions office and said, just give me the statistics on what happened in my class. How did these people get in? Now, as you probably know, today, Duke is probably at 5 or 6% acceptance. In those days, in my class, we had, I think it was 5,200 people apply. 43% got in, 43%. So I said to my fellow classmates, you're all very distinguished, you've done great, but none of you could get into Duke today, and you only got into Duke before because we accepted almost half the people. So it was a different world.
It was a different world. What do you credit Duke's, the change in Duke's standing to?
Duke has risen up as much as any school in the last 50 years that I can think of, with the possible exception of Stanford. Stanford has also risen up dramatically. I think in Duke's case, it was a factor of several things. We had some outstanding presidents, beginning with Terry Sanford, who really wanted to make Duke a national university from the time he became the president. We've, in addition to other great presidents, we've had a kind of we try harder attitude at Duke. So I think people here really want to prove that they're as good as their brethren in the Northeast, let's say. Third, I think, is the athletic program, particularly basketball, has given Duke a visibility that it's attracted students that might not otherwise have come here. Emory is a very good school too, but because it doesn't have Division I sports the way Duke does, it hasn't attracted kind of the same kind of visibility that I think Duke has. Duke also has benefited from having a complex of a really great medical complex, as well as a law school, a business school. So it's been a not just a college, but a real university. It has all the things you want coming together. It has a interdisciplinary spirit and camaraderie in the university that I think is very good. But also I think it's the fact that a lot of the students here are very loyal, and they've come back and have been helpful in philanthropy or in other alumni ways. They've done a lot of things that maybe students at other schools haven't done. So it's a combination of things that have made it possible for Duke to now be consistently in the top 10 universities in the United States.
So what role does the Board of Trustees play in this sort of thing?
Well, of course,
Improvement.
the Board of Trustees, we ask the Board of Trustees, they'll say the most important thing that the university does is have the Board of Trustees meetings, right? But the truth is, Duke has had some really good trustees, and people really committed to it. Duke's situation is a little different than other universities. Duke had, when I chaired it, there was 37 people, I think, on the board. And I would say about 90%, 95% showed up at every meeting. So some universities have 55, 60, 70, 80%, 80 member boards, and people don't show up. And it gives an attitude that doesn't make that much difference to the university if you show up or not. People showed up. People took it very seriously. The Board of Trustees has also been among the biggest donors of the school, too. And obviously, everybody recognizes that if you go on one of these nonprofit boards, that people expect you to probably give money. There's an old saying in the nonprofit world, if you go on a board, give, get, or get off. Give money, get money, or get off the board. And I wouldn't say Duke has that attitude, but there's no doubt that people get on the board sometimes who are not financially able to give very much, but they give their time. And as I like to remind people in the philanthropy world, the most valuable thing anybody can do to help a nonprofit organization is give your time. You can make more money, but you can't make more time. And so when you're giving your time, you're giving your most precious asset. When de Tocqueville came here in the 1830s to write about the United States, he said he had a hard time getting people to interview with him because everybody was busy volunteering. Because it's a tradition this country's had for such a long time, volunteering, giving back, and we continue that today. So I'm upset at times when I read that the great philanthropists in the country are people that give X, Y, or Z dollars, when you should really measure philanthropy by how much time somebody put into something as well as how much money they might have given.
I get the impression that you are not just writing a check and sending it off. You're very engaged in the programs that you're supporting.
I've tried to get engaged, and so many of the times when I've gotten on boards, I've wound up as a chair, which maybe reflects the fact that I have been engaged, or they couldn't find anybody else who wanted to be the chair.
Or you
one
make
of the
a
two.
suggestion and you make it again, and then they finally say, "Fine, you do it. You be
Right.
the chair."
There is that. But in the end, being a board chair at Duke was, I was honored to do it. I was the first person who was Jewish to become the chairman of the board at Duke. And Dan Blue, who I was also doing an interview here, I think he was the first African American to be chairman of the board at Duke. When I came here, Duke had a Jewish quota. It was a 5% quota. It was a quota that was not officially stated, but that was an informal Jewish quota of 5%. When Terry Sanford became president in late '69, he heard about it and changed it, got rid of it. There was, I wouldn't say the black quota, but in my class, there were only 12 blacks in my class, and that's because Duke just desegregated for undergraduates, I think, in 1963.
Right.
And so it wasn't, when I started in '66, it was just beginning to desegregate the university. So it's a different world. The university, it reflects the country. The country's changed dramatically, but in those days, Duke was just getting out of being a segregated school.
Right. As a South Carolinian, I'm well aware of all those things.
Well, the best-selling book.
Go ahead.
The best-selling book in the United States right now, #1 New York Times bestseller, is a book about South Carolina and how Fort Sumter was at the heart of the beginning of the Civil War. And there was a man from South Carolina who led the effort to secede from the Union. And it was an effort that no other state was as interested in as South Carolina. Obviously, the world's changed because South Carolina is now a hub of so many other great things that the country's doing. But it was in those days, it was the leader of secessionist movement. Right?
Yes, that's for sure. You're a higher education expert. I mean, because of the Chicago, you're the chair of that board. You were on the Harvard Corporation. You were a fellow, which is only like 6 or 7 people.
Harvard Corporation used to be 6 people for 350 or 60 years. They run it to 12. Now it's 12. University of Chicago is 55.
So that's a bigger even.
That's a big board, and Chicago has a different model. Their motto is, look, if you're extremely wealthy and you don't have time to show up, give us a lot of money, you don't have to show up at the board meetings. So there are some people on that board who are extremely wealthy, among the richest in the United States, but they kind of get a pass. And in fact, for a long time, I got a pass too, because their meetings were the same time as the Duke meetings. And so I said, look, I just can't come to both, so I'm going to go to the Duke meetings, and when I finish with Duke, then I'll try to come to the Chicago meetings. So I didn't go to a lot of meetings for a long time at Chicago.
There are a lot of challenges now facing universities. Public perception is, in many cases, negative. The Supreme Court is making it more difficult for universities to have a student population that reflects the country. And the collegiate athletics is basically in turmoil. How do you see is there one of those that you would want to comment on, or do you
sure.
see?
Look, in any generation, people always will say, we got really big problems now and the world's falling apart and we don't know how we're going to get through the next generation. But the world survives. So yes, the affirmative action opportunities that existed before are now outlawed by the Supreme Court, more or less. But there are ways you can legally circumvent that. You can figure out how to do some things that comply with the Supreme Court decision and still have a diversified student body. So ever since the Supreme Court ruled, universities, while they've changed their procedures, they're still having classes that largely reflect the population, I believe. We don't know for certain, but I think they do. Secondly, athletics. Athletics has gone through a change that nobody would ever predicted. That not only are universities making enormous amount of money on athletics, but they are charging, they are paying their students now. The student athletes are getting paid a large sums of money. And this is something that nobody would ever expected before. So, and then not only are the universities paying them, but they're getting contracts on the outside. So just recently, as we talked, New Balance has just given, I think, a $10 or $10.5 million contract to Cooper Flagg, who's the star of the basketball team. And who would have thought that a basketball player could be paid directly while he's in college? But that's the world's changed. And he
hasn't even played a game yet.
Hasn't played a game yet. And so maybe he shouldn't play a game. He's doing so well without playing a game. But actually, he's a pretty good player, and I think he'll do quite well at Duke. But the world's changed. Duke initially resisted the ones and dones in basketball. Coach K wanted people to graduate, but then it wasn't competitive any longer to be doing that. So we did go to the ones and dones. It's complicated because you have to recognize that these students are not likely to graduate from college ever.
Yeah. It will be rare.
In the old days,
15 years.
If you went to basketball, NBA 1 year early, or even NFL 1 year early, a lot of students that did that would come back over the summers and get a graduate degree or get their undergraduate degree. Now, if you only completed 1 year or even one semester at a university, you're not likely at all to get a degree. Now, you can say Bill Gates didn't have a college degree, he did okay. Mark Zuckerberg did okay without a college degree. So you can say, yes, it's okay to not have a college degree. And if you're Cooper Flagg or you're other superstars who can make it in the NBA, make a lot of money, maybe it's okay. But a lot of people that leave universities like Duke or other good schools, they think they're going to be an NBA player and they don't even get drafted. They've given up their college eligibility and they wind up playing overseas or not making much money. And then if they get injured by the late 20s, they're out of work. They don't have a college degree. And so in some ways, they've really hurt themselves by not getting a college degree.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine how it's all going to settle down or if it will, but I'll keep your advice in mind that everyone always thinks there's a big problem and it works out.
Well, civilization will go forward no matter what, but it'll work out, but it'll be different and the rules will be adjusted to accommodate some problems that exist. right now we're experimenting with ones and dones and getting paid and things. Maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years, the world of college athletics may change. I think what may happen is that you're going to get private equity firms like mine coming in and investing in conferences and buying a piece of the ACC or the Big 12 or whatever it's now called, and sharing in the profits of these kind of organizations in ways that you never would have thought before. And someday you may find a basketball team like the Duke basketball team purchased by a private equity firm in conjunction with the university. So the private equity firm might own 49%, the university might own 51%, and that is not impossible.
Based on the numbers that I'm somewhat familiar with, it's not a profit-making enterprise, college athletics.
Today, as the way the universities have run it, virtually nothing makes money except for football. Even at Duke, basketball is not really a profitable venture. So yes, but the things may change. Maybe TV contracts become higher than they are today. Who knows? But the betting will get involved, and maybe universities will share in that. I don't know how to predict what will happen, but correct. Today, all of college athletics is supported by football. And if you don't have a football team that gets on television, you're subsidizing all the sports in the university completely. At Duke, I suspect that the university, when I was the chair of the board, if I recall the numbers, Duke was probably putting in $14 or $15 million a year into the university athletic program. The rest was paid for by the profits from basketball and football, though the profits from football were much bigger than the profits from basketball.
And they don't play as many games. It doesn't make sense.
Well, the contracts in football are just staggering, but the size that they are, and basketball, Duke, we have a relatively small arena. So for a lot of historic reasons, we're not likely to change it. But if you had a 20,000 seat arena at Duke, you could sell out 20,000 seats, but we don't have that.
Yeah, and I think if you were looking at it now with all of the turmoil, you might wonder whether you would be making a wise investment, because you just don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, maybe Duke can't compete at that high level in this new world that we can't imagine yet.
It's hard to know. Obviously, Duke used to be one of the best schools in the country in basketball and football, but I'd say in the 1960s we faded in football after we went to a couple bowl games, and it's very difficult now to compete in football without a gigantic budget and without recruiting a lot of really, really top players. In basketball, you can only need to recruit 2 or 3 really great players to have a good team. Football is much more challenging.
It is. It feels like there's a lot of new energy and enthusiasm among the students, so perhaps that will help fill the stadium.
Well, it may happen. I think in football, you also have the phenomenon that you have injury possibilities that are really terrible. You have to worry about concussions and so forth. And I wouldn't be surprised if 10 years from today, the Ivy League got out of football completely for concussion and health reasons and financial reasons. Yeah,
there are an awful lot of parents of young children who don't think football is the right sport anymore for that.
Well, the Olympics are now talking about in LA coming up with and having flag football.
Flag football, right.
Right. So maybe flag football will be the future. Who knows?
So let me just switch gears a little bit. I've got the impression that you, in addition to all the other work you're doing, that you like bringing people together. I was thinking of the Economic Club of Washington, which is when you found out that you were actually a pretty good interviewer. You had to put together a program once a quarter. I think it was Vernon Jordan who got you involved in that originally. And you host dinners regularly for members of Congress, your bipartisan dinners. Am I right? And what is Duke's responsibility to get people together to help build community? Am I reading your interests right? You do enjoy that?
Well, I do. I didn't consider myself an interviewer of any note. What happened was my firm, Carlyle, used to have gigantic investment conferences with 1,000, 2,000 people, and to have a draw at those conferences, I would hire former presidents of the United States and former speakers of the House or secretaries of state, and they were boring sometimes. So I went to the speaking agent and said, can I interview them, make it maybe more humorous, maybe I can add some humor. They said, is the speaking fee going to be the same? I said, yeah, it'll be the same. They said, as long as the fees are the same, they don't care if they're interviewed or give a speech. So I started interviewing them, and I made Hillary Clinton look very funny. I made Ben Bernanke look like exciting kind of person. And so I thought
You want to change chairs and you can.
so I thought I could do this. And then when Vernon Jordan asked me to be the head of the Economic Club of Washington, he said, just get 4 business people a year to speak. That's all you do, and let them speak. And then you have questions from the members come in, you read the cards from the questions, and that's it. So I started doing it, and I realized the members were falling asleep when the speeches were being given, and the questions from the members were terrible. So I started pretending I was reading questions to the members, and I was making them up. I was making up humorous questions. People would laugh. I decided to junk the format and just go to the interview format. And then Bloomberg saw it and eventually put it on TV. So it isn't a skill that I thought I had to be an interviewer, and it's not likely that you're going to get to heaven more quickly by being a good interviewer. But it's something that keeps me interested in things, and I'll tell you why I enjoy it now. Not only is it gets a chance to meet people. In other words, sometimes I would have a chance to meet somebody, but if they want to be on a show and I'm doing the interview, I get to meet them. So that's it. But also, when you get to be a certain age, your brain, is maybe going to atrophy a little bit for normal or unnormal reasons. And, they say you should, if you're worried about this, take up a foreign language. I have no foreign language skills. Take up a musical instrument. I'm tone deaf. I can't play an instrument. Or do crossword puzzles. I can't do that. So I thought interviewing is my way to kind of do the equivalent of keeping your brain sharp. So I have to prepare for the interviews, just as you've obviously prepared. You have to, do some research, read, prepare the question, then to be in a dialogue with people and be alert to it. So it's my way of kind of keeping Alzheimer's as far away as possible.
All right. Well, I'm glad to get the true story of your,
that's why
your origin interview
That's
story.
why I do it. And we'll see. I'll find out in time whether it works or not.
And how is it going with the bipartisan dinners?
Well, let me explain what that is. About 10 years ago, I thought that members of Congress never really were meeting with each other from opposite parties anymore, because we don't have conference committees passing legislation anymore. The congressional delegations that used to go overseas, called CODELs, they don't have them much more anymore. They don't have very much of them anymore. So I decided what I would do is I'd host a dinner at the Library of Congress where I would say to members, please come, give you a nice, very free dinner. You can get there easily by going underground through the passageways in the Congress to the Library of Congress. No traffic problems.
No rain. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
No rain.
No rain, no weather, no problems. And then I will have a great person like Doris Kearns Goodwin. I'll interview her, or Ken Burns, someone like that, about American history. And you can learn more about American history, but I want you to sit with people from the opposite party in the opposite house. And they do. And we've had maybe more than 100 of them by now. And members really say, sometimes sadly, this is the most interesting thing they're doing in Congress, is going to these dinners, because it's that shouldn't be the most interesting thing they're doing, but many members of Congress seem to love it, and so I'll keep doing it as long as members show up. We get about 250 every time.
Is it really once a month, or do you take the summer
It says,
off?
well, if you do it once a month or around the congressional schedule, so we try to do about 10 of them a year or something like that.
So, I'm still going to stick to my theory that you enjoy getting people together and
Sure.
giving them opportunities to communicate with each other and build a community.
I enjoy it. I think it's fun to bring people together, and they're not throwing things at me, so that's good. And nobody's usually criticizing me for giving them a free dinner, so that's good. And like members of Congress have told me that they've gotten to meet people from the opposite party in the opposite house that they wouldn't have otherwise met, and they think that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. I think with Duke, what I'm remembering is during the last campaign, you were very positive about the idea of bringing everyone in the room, not just the people with big bank accounts,
Right.
but and why is that? Why was that?
Well, a capital campaign is the great American invention of the 20th century, you could say. The universities didn't have capital campaigns in the 1800s, and then they kind of invented these in the 1900s or so, and now they're gigantic affairs, so they're multi-billion-dollar affairs, and they tend to bring a university together. I think it's a bonding thing for university alums and also for faculty and others who all participate in it. So I think it's a good thing, and obviously it helps raise money for our university, which I think is important. And I should say that one of the reasons I've been connected to a number of universities, and I enjoy it, is that I think that universities are the great national treasures that we have that often aren't appreciated fully, because people from all over the world, they want to get degrees from American universities. American universities have the opportunity to take somebody from a modest background like mine and enable them to do things in life that get to a different standing in life. And so I think these are treasures.
I think sometimes you've stayed connected with Duke in recent years. I'll just ask you, often with alumni, there's a period where you're not engaged. Life gets in the way, you're raising your family, and so on. And I was wondering, as I looked at all the things that you've done for Duke, did that happen? Was that your experience? It certainly was mine. I wasn't engaged for a while, and then I came back. Did that happen with you, and what was it that drew you back?
Well, absolutely. I graduated from Duke in 1970. I don't think I set foot back on the campus for 25 years. I was building my career. There was no benefit for me that I see going back to Duke. I wasn't really that engaged in the basketball program. And then Joel Fleischman, who was a professor at Duke, involved with the Sanford School, helped to get it off the ground. He came to see me and asked me for some money to help build a building at the Sanford School. And I said, okay, and I got engaged. That was the first time I really got engaged, the first time anybody ever asked me for money from Duke. And so that was 1995. So 25 years I did nothing at Duke. So I tell people you can, do other things and come back later in life if you don't want to do it right away. And that's what I did. And so since that time, though, I've gotten more engaged. And then they asked me to go on the board of Duke, I guess maybe a few years after that. And then I got more involved in Duke. And you can stay on the board at that time 12 years. I don't know if it's still 12 years.
It's still 12 years. Yeah, you served your time, and we appreciate it. If I look at what you've done at Duke, my assumption, and you can correct me, is that maybe you follow your interest as much as follow the Joel Fleischmans of the world in there. You wouldn't have made that gift unless you were interested in public policy.
Well, in that case, I was interested in public policies. I'd spent my years in the White House, and I liked public policy, but I also felt I owed something to Duke. I hadn't really repaid the student loans yet. I mean, I paid the student loans back, but I hadn't really paid back Duke for the gift that they give me of an education and the scholarship they give me and other things. So I felt the same at the University of Chicago. They gave me a large scholarship, and I've been very involved there, the law school. So, I've tried to do that. I think in the end, if you try to be buried with having all your money in your bank account, I'm not sure that you're going to be getting to heaven more quickly or be happier when you're in your deathbed. Say, geez, look at all the money I have in my bank account. Is that going to make me happier?
Well, in the context of Duke, you've supported the libraries, which we
Yes.
know from earlier conversation here that was dear to your heart. And I think you've also been very engaged in supporting the arts, financial aid as well. You sort of came through for a program to help the low-income first-generation students.
Well, I was a first-generation student.
There you go.
And so as I was finishing up my term, Dick Broad had asked if I would put up some money to help first-generation students, which I did, and now we've changed the program a bit. The arts is something I've been involved with a long time at the Kennedy Center, the Lincoln Center, and Duke didn't have an arts building that quite did what I thought it should do, so I asked if they would support the effort to have one, and I would put up about half the money for it to get it done. And then, I've supported extending the Cameron Indoor Stadium because they had no place to entertain, as you may recall, at basketball games. And then I supported the library, supported the Rare Book Library, and then I've supported some other programs at Duke that people have asked me about. I wish I had as much money as everybody thinks I have so I could do everything that people ask me to do. But, I try to be supportive of as many things as I can.
And thank you for that. I understand that you're okay with the arts building being called the Ruby.
They called me about that before they wanted to have it officially called or unofficially called the Ruby, and I said I don't care. It didn't bother me, but and I think the building has served a purpose. I've talked to them about whether they need to have a bigger building and more extensive, but they seem to be happy with the building they have. So I think the building has done a good job for Duke.
I think it's a lovely space. I've been to some performances there. They're slightly more informal and then
Right.
really close. Like it was ballet dancers from New York, and it was amazing just to see their bodies up close because they're so strong, and you don't really get that when they're up on the stage. So I think it brings a lot to the campus. And now that the house has moved from across the street and you've got the art museum right there, it's really a lovely intersection.
It's been a good addition. This building that we're now in is a building that came about as a result when I wanted to have the Duke board go to the Stanford University. You were on the tour, right?
I went on the tour.
All right, so we took a tour of Stanford and did a retreat there, and then we came up with some ideas. One is to have a visitor center, which we really didn't quite have, and so we came back. Ultimately, we built this visitor center, and Bruce Karsh's family, when Bruce helped endow it and get it off the ground.
It turned out really well.
So far, it's worked out, I think, yeah.
Good.
So I'm happy with it. And look, I'm happy with things that occurred when I was at Duke. And, the highlight at the end was I think Dick asked me to give the commencement speech at the end of my last year. And it was a bittersweet time because I'd asked my mother to come, but she passed away just a few weeks before the commencement. And it was actually on Mother's Day. So we talked about it, but I enjoyed giving that commencement speech, and Duke has been something I'm very happy that I got connected with. And if my neighbor hadn't given me the application, I would be at some other school. Who knows?
Well, we're glad you came here. What about Duke makes you most proud?
Well, many things. One is Duke is a highly regarded university. So now many of my friends whose kids once thought they wanted to go to Harvard, now they want to go to Duke. Duke has built a combination of good athletics and good academics in the same university. I'm proud of the fact that Duke got through the recent turmoil of universities as well as any university ever. It's a university that I think everybody can be proud of, and I know university is perfect. Duke can always do some things better, but as a general rule of thumb, I think Duke has done a good job of educating people, which is the most important thing that a university does. A good job of world-class research, a good job of keeping alums informed about what's happened to the university. As you may have heard me say, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, everybody should have as an interest in how a university does after you graduate. Because if the university gets better and better and better and better, then people think you're smarter and smarter and smarter than you really are. If the university goes this way, people think you're not as smart. So I have an incentive, and all alums have an incentive, to make the university look better and better, because people say, wow, you went to Duke, you must be really smart. Whereas when I got in, there were only half the people got in. It wasn't so hard. You have to be that smart to get in. So I tongue-in-cheek, like to say that everybody has an interest in their university doing better and better. But the truth is, universities attract people to give money because they're proud of the university that they attended. It's their alma mater. Maybe in some cases they want to have their children go there. They think that giving money may help. I don't know that it does. And then I think people just take pride in the school that kind of nurtured them from being a teenager to a young adult.
It's an important phase of life.
Right. So your children go to Duke?
One.
One.
Our daughter.
And your daughter was happy?
Yeah.
So my two daughters went to Harvard. My son said he got into Harvard. I don't want to go to Harvard.
He went to Duke.
He went to Duke. And he said, I remember saying, Andrew, I'm going to be the chairman of the board if you're here. It's not a good idea for you to probably be here because it doesn't look good. And he said, no, it's not a problem. Nobody knows who the chairman of the board is, which probably is right. None of the students can care.
Last question. What are your hopes for Duke in its second century?
Well, Duke is in its second century now, really, in some sense. Duke, depending on your point of view, Duke was started in 1838.
I know.
But if you get past that, it was started in 1924, and then we get to the second century. I hope that Duke will remain as one of the top universities in the United States. I think we have to be realistic that we don't have the endowment that Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, and Stanford do. So competing with schools with that kind of endowment is difficult, not impossible. But I think I want it to be a place where people say, it's not a university that's a Southern school. It's a national school, happens to be located in the South, but it's a national school that the parents of their kids who go here are very proud to have their kids go here, and the students that go here are happy. The most elusive thing in life is personal happiness. Very hard to get, as we all know, going through life. But students who graduate from Duke seem to be personally happy, and that's good. And if their kids are personally happy, the parents are happy. So Duke produces a lot of happiness, and I think that's good. I also hope we win another national basketball championship in the beginning of the second century, and I hope we win a lot more after that, too.
And you hope you're there watching it. Right?
I expect to be there. I hope to be there. I went to the last game. When Coach K's last season, I thought maybe God was looking favorably upon him because we got to the Final Four. I went down there in New Orleans, and we just, there was some school, I can't remember the name of it, that beat us in the semifinals.
Well, I'm with you. Let's hope that happens. And thank you very much for your time and energy. And
Well, thank
I know
you for
that time is the most valuable thing
Thanks for doing this, and thanks for your service as a great board member at Duke when I was on the board. And thanks for taking the time to do this. This is not easy, and you're obviously prepared. So you're giving the most valuable thing to prepare, which is your time.
All right, good enough. Thank
Thank
you.
you.